What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Common Sense Living, the show where we discuss financial and economic trends, business topics, gold and silver, and many more things. So, in today's episode, I want to discuss why we need to start rewarding saving and not spending in our society. So, the first reason is debt is cheaper to pay back. It encourages people to take on more and more debt. And really, with higher inflation, which we're seeing now, which we haven't seen the last 10 or 20 years so much, that debt that we're paying back, it's going to be cheaper and cheaper uh, to pay back for those individuals who take those risks, who take on all that debt. And this is one thing that really bothers me about our system. So if I take out debt, whether a credit card, student loan, mortgage, really any other way, the debt, it's going to be cheaper to pay back in the future. Now, I know that there's an interest rate charge with a lot of these debts, but assuming you're making the payment to avoid that interest rate charge, you're really paying back less than you need to in the future. And the system, it's designed this way. So people rack up debt, they're not educated on personal finances and cost of debt, and ultimately they have to learn about this the hard way. And one area we especially see this is student loans. Now, I definitely believe that anyone who takes on student debt needs to pay it back. It doesn't need the American taxpayer. To me, that's just ludicrous that that's even being considered or talked about. But I do feel some sympathy for these kids because they're promised the world, that a college degree is gonna help them find the best job and all sorts of things. And ultimately, they take out an astronomical loan. It's got terrible interest rates, and whatever they study or whatever their degree is in, a lot of times it just doesn't materialize. So debt's an issue, and I think everyone knows someone with too much debt. A lot of people, they went to school, they took on way too much debt. And savings, it doesn't just need to be encouraged for that financial reason, but it really needs to be encouraged for stability. It's important for so many reasons, but everything depends on spending in our system. It's designed this way. The banks are allowed to lend out way too much money. It's borderline ridiculous for what they have on hand. So the reserve requirement, it's zero right now, and it's usually been closer to 10, which is still way too low. But that lower, the fact that banks can just go out and lend so much money, it just sets up everything for for some sort of bank run or some sort of collapse in the future. And I know right now, a lot of people, they feel real comfortable with the FDIC insurance, but at some point that's going to have to stop. And if you see multiple runs all at once, it's just going to fall. The system's just going to collapse like a house of cards. So we can look at other countries, and there's a lot of them that encourage savings. It's part of the culture. They spend responsibly. And we used to do that here, in our country, back in the 50s, 60s. But say, for example, we look at a country like Japan. They encourage savings with practices like Kakaibo. Kakaibo is basically budgeting, tracking all your expenses in a diary, and it emphasizes things that you really want versus things that you really need. Now, here in the US, people, it's just completely different. They're encouraged to go out to spend relentlessly on credit. The economists, they want it. They want that to show. Consumer spending is such a huge portion of GDP. And no one's educated about the dangers of taking on too much debt, what can happen. So we've learned the hard way. If we spend too much, there's hardly any personal finance classes taught in high school, and I've talked about this a lot in other episodes. And really, college, there should definitely be a few taught in college as well. They can teach all sorts of things like um, all these one-on-one type classes that you don't really need for the real world. But personal finance is definitely one thing everyone's going to have to deal with, and they're going to have to know the basics of it. Now, another reason spending should be discouraged, and this really has more to do with the federal government, is, and I mentioned this earlier, it's inflation. So we know inflation And I want to emphasize it hurts the lower and middle class more than the wealthy class. And what's really irritating, in my opinion, is the argument that economists make around this. It's that having low inflation, it's good for the economy, it helps stimulate it. But my question really is, who is really benefit from having this every year? If I'm going out and I'm saving, $20,000 in a year, the next year that $20,000, the purchasing power is not $20,000. Even with low inflation, like 1 or 2%, it's going to be less. But you start seeing uh, the inflation we've seen the last year or two, and the statistics around 8 or 10%, it's going to be a lot lower. And we all know that it's been much more inflation, and prices have been much higher for things. I've seen things, eggs are around $6 for a dozen. That definitely wasn't the case 5 years ago. It was, maybe a buck or two at the most. Um, so, who benefits? Government officials. They're never held responsible for their reckless spending. We don't reward things like, you know, having a budget surplus. That's not something that people pressure the government on because they're not educated on why it's so important. The government and the officials in the federal government, they want to pass bills. That's what, big bills, and be able to tout their bills and travel the country to everyone. But you know, bills, of course, cost money, and they raise inflation, all that spending. So, pork spending, useless spending, it happens all too often in the federal government, and we need to cut down on that. Now, big corporations, especially banks, they too they benefit huge from uh, banks, obviously, with all the different loans and everything, and the way they're able to lend out so much more than they actually have on hand. But also, I want to talk about big corporations. And if you think about different retailers, different places you go, they try and get you to come in and buy more than you actually can spend. And you see this all the time. Pretty much every big business does this. So they're able to boost their revenue when people, otherwise wouldn't be spending. So the system's broke, and nobody in DC, they really want to fix it. There's no motivation to fix it. And for me, I think we need to start getting back to telling people and showing, the younger people how important savings is, and not getting out and just spending money. What it can do for you down the road in terms of, you can save up, you can put down money for a house. Getting back to those traditional values. So that's all I got for today. I appreciate everyone watching. If you're liking this content, please subscribe, please like, comment. It helps the channel out. I definitely appreciate it. Thanks a lot.